Let's talk lightweight hunting knives. Okay, in front of you I've got, I'd say 4 very popular hunting knife options. We're just going to get down to it and compare these. These are some specs that you can usually get online, but sometimes they're not always as precise as I would like when it comes to making sure my kit is as light as possible. Okay, this is the Havalon Piranta, 46 grams. This is the Havalon Baracuta, 84 grams. This is the Outdoor Edge Razor EDC Light 3.5, 76 grams. And this, kind of as an interesting contrast, is the Kestrel Skeleton Orvis Hunter at 42 grams. Now this particular knife, fixed blade being that it is, I'm going to want to also add in some sort of a sharpener for this, so that's going to, when we're comparing side by side, that's going to be important. Okay, the next important thing for me here is the thickness of the blades. Zero that out. Okay, so the Havalon Piranta blade, this is the 60A blade. I'm coming in at 0.63 millimeters. The Havalon Baracuta coming in at 0.90 millimeters, maybe 0.89. Well, try not to twist that. I'll call it 0.82 millimeters. Set that there. Sorry if these aren't always in the same order. 1.57 towards the tip, 1.14, about halfway through the blade, 0.94, 0.85. And then the Razorlite EDC here. So we'll measure this one in a couple spots up here by the tip, 0.63. .65, 0.64, 0.65. Now, I'm going to point out, because this is brought up in a lot of the online forums and things about the durability of the Outdoor Edge versus the Havalon. So this blade here at 0.64 versus the Havalon Piranta, for example, at 0.83, 0.82, that's considerably thinner. Not quite as thin as the Havalon Piranta at 0.60, but 0.60 is pretty darn close to the 0.64. So in all reality, the Outdoor Edge and the Piranta, as far as true full blade thickness, is actually more comparable than these thicker blades you get on the Piranta or the Baracuta or something like this fixed blade here. Now, the real test, I guess you will, of what a lot of people really like to debate of the robustness of these particular blades comes down to how they're kind of fixed to the knife. So the Outdoor Edge has this fairly thick receiver here that runs almost, well, at least 3/4, if not more, the length of the blade, and covers and supports better than half the width of the blade, where the Havalon Piranta is supported, I'd say, less than 1/3 of that dimension in its blade. So that is something to consider. A lot of people claim that they'll have problems with the blades breaking. You can see here I've got an example of a broken blade. That's what, it can break anywhere, and having a broken blade inside an animal you're trying to process is not ideal. I will say though, I'd probably break one of these blades 1 in 3 animals that I process, and when it breaks, it's not ever been a big deal. You just replace the blade and move on. But I have heard stories of people that broke a blade and then couldn't find the blade and then got cut on the blade while looking for it, or something on the piece that was the sharp piece that was now stuck in the meat or something like that. But anyways, so that goes into the next major point, and the next major deciding factor between these two knives as you pit them side by side. The Havalon here is a great knife, but it is a little bit cumbersome, and some people would say downright dangerous in how the blade has to be removed. It's basically this little tab has to be pushed up and over the lip of this little piece that it's resting inside here, and that allows it to essentially slide up and over. You can see it's starting to slide there, and it's not an easy process. So you can imagine with cold hands, that could be tricky. And if you slipped off of that or something, or somehow cut yourself, that would not be a good situation in the backcountry. So they send this little Piranta with this tool, this little plastic case looking thing, and it's designed to be a safer way to get the blade on and off. So if I close that up, I put a little pressure on this, and then the blade just pops right out. And the same thing for putting the blade, a new fresh blade on. I slip it on there, get it more or less started. Don't have to put a lot of pressure, just get it started on there. Put it in the little plasticky clip thing, and it clips into place. Now, when it comes to, again, comparing side by side here, these other knives don't need this little tool. So I got to actually add that weight to the overall weight of my system. If I'm going to be safe and take that with me, that's now part of this knife weight for all intents and purposes. On the flip side, when you're comparing with this outdoor edge style of replaceable blade, I got a little button right here. And this little button, I grab onto the blade, push the button, and the blade slips right out. No pressure, no tension, no fiddling with it. And to put it back in, I just line it back up, push the button again, and it slips in place and locks in. Now while I'm on that subject, I'm going to point out one thing that this is not, I haven't really ever had this talked about, but I notice it's a little bit annoying, is there's a little bit of play here. It's going to be impossible to show on video, but there's a considerable, I can make a gap there that I can see. I could probably almost slide this other blade, see if I can get it to, certainly could slide a piece of paper in there, but I can make it wobble. There's play in that knife, and I don't like that. I like it to be nice and tight. These other knives, there's no play. I guess I correct myself there. There's a teensy bit of play, much less. I can get it to wiggle just a little bit, much less than the outdoor edge. In this bigger Havalon, the Piranta, there's no play whatsoever in that. Now, to replace this bigger, the Baracuta, not the Piranta, this bigger blade from Havalon, same principle, but because you have a lot more leverage here and it's a bigger blade, it's a lot easier. I can just slip that in. Again, you have to pull on a little bit, but I don't feel as unsafe as managing that little tiny blade. I got a good grip on it. It's a lot more tactile. I'm less likely with cold fingers or something to make a slip or make a mistake with that. So while I have that out, I'm going to point out some additional feature sets that some of these have and some of them don't. Now, the Havalons have a lot of different blade options that you can trade out for. So, for example, this Baracuta, you can get this quite significant, as far as placeable saw blades go, it's not an insignificant length. It's considerable. I've cut through, you know, at 2 or 3 inch diameter logs pretty quick with this little nut, with this little blade. It's a handy little saw, considering the additional weight penalty for having this saw blade in your pack is 6 grams. You can take a couple of those and not have it add a lot of weight to my pack. Now, a lot of backcountry hunters are going to gravitate something more like this silky pocket boy saw. I mean, that's a legit saw. You know, you could do a lot with a saw of that size, but that's a lot of extra weight in your pack. And nobody is going to ever say, and me included, that this little blade here is going to do everything that this blade will do. But when it comes to most of my hunting needs, so if I need to cut a bone, if I need to cut a rib cage, if I need to cut the skull cap off, if I'm not taking the whole head or the whole Euro mount for a smaller buck or something, a blade like this is all that I'm going to need. And again, a 6 gram weight penalty in my pack. Unfortunately, the Outdoor Edge doesn't have that as an option. Outdoor Edge sells knives that do have saw blades, but in this particular lighter weight model, they don't. At least not that I was able to find on their website. And so if you want one of these Outdoor Edge style of knives, you're going to have to go to one that takes a different style of blade. It's going to be a heavier knife. This is the lightest of their knives that I could find, and it's not going to be in the same weight class as these other options here. The Havalon Piranta, again, as an option, it does have little tiny blades here, but again, in practice, this size of blade starts to become less useful, in my opinion. I have processed an elk once where we were cutting a little bit of bone with it just to try and hustle things up, and this little saw blade, which again is, I can't even get to register, less than a gram, tiny little, you know, inconsequential weight penalty here for a lot of people, but it's just not in the same class of what it can do compared to the bigger Havalon saw blade. And so what we've actually ended up doing in recent years, if there's more than one of us, we'll end up taking, one of us will have this Havalon knife and one of us would have the bigger. They both have their pros and their cons. And I will say, between these two knives, I prefer most of my skinning work, caping, those kinds of things. That just fits in I got fairly small hands, fits in my hands better. I have a lot more control over this blade. It's a really handy size to use. Than this monstrosity. This thing is huge. I mean, look how much longer than my hand that is. It's a big, long blade here. However, where this particular size of knife and size of blade really shines for me is when I'm trying to get, for an elk size animal, for example, if you're going to get into, if you got to get the back straps off, if you're taking it out in pieces, you're boning it, quartering it, something, a knife of this smaller size is not going to have the reach. I'm going to be grabbing on the edge of the meat. I'm going to be making a slice. I'm going to pull it further. I'm going to make another slice and pull, sometimes 3 or 4 layers of slicing to get down in there before I can, move on to the next section. Whereas a knife with this longer reach, if you compare, I mean, we're talking double the reach. I can just, much fewer slices. It's quicker. I can get in there and make one slice where this would take 2 or 3 and get the job done quicker. That's going to be an advantage of this knife as well. I would say normally this knife would have a similar advantage. However, one limitation of all of these replaceable blade knives is if you want to compare with a traditional fixed blade or single blade knife, non-replaceable blade knife, I get the full range of this entire blade. If I punch that into something, if I go to carve something with that, there's nothing to restrict that blade slicing through. However, with a blade like this, I've got the cutting edge, but it's only going to penetrate in about, what is that, third of an inch in millimeters, so 9-10 millimeters, before it hits this little lip that's right there. That little lip's going to start gumming up with hide, with bits of hide and sinew and hair. It's going to start, it's going to restrict my ability to get a smooth cut in deep into where this knife isn't going to have that same problem. So this little Havalon is going to be the worst. I end up getting a lot of gunk that builds up. This little lip on this edge right here, and especially if there's the backbone on trying to get down in there for the back straps or trying to get in under the tenderloins, it's always snagging up on something, and again builds up with little chunks of meat and every other bit of gunk in there. Whereas this knife, you can just get right in there. It slices what it needs to slice. So you start getting built up, it's just, paper towel or just even your fingers, and you wipe it off and you're good as new and you move on. So this knife is going to beat any of these replaceable blade knives for that one reason alone. Not to mention, you are going to have indisputable durability issues compared. These knives all are going to have thinner blades and have more of a propensity to break if you were trying to get in, if you had to, if you were in a really tight situation where you had nowhere else to move a leg and you had to, kind of torque around to get into a ball joint or something like that, and you're kind of leveraging with the knife, the tip of the knife or something, this one's going to hold up a lot better than any of these. This one is, I wouldn't even try that. Knowing the propensity for this to break, wouldn't even try it. This one, where the tip is a little more protected, I might give that a little bit more of a go. I might get in there and wedge a little bit more with that. This knife, again, it's got even a little bit thicker than that. Probably would do okay, but it's not going to hold up like that. But is that a big deal? On 99% of the situations I've encountered, it's not. We did have a situation with a bull this fall where the way it landed, it rolled basically under a giant log. It was too big to move, and it was then up against a stand of really thick trees. So the only things that we could really access, I had about maybe 1.5 foot space in between the big log and the trees where he was wedged up against to try and work and get him boned out. And a knife like this in that situation is going to be a lot more useful than when I'm working in tight spaces than this would be in most situations. Okay, so to kind of wrap things up, a few other little side notes here, if you will, when it comes to being safe with some of these type of knives. Like I said, I always carry this little replacement blade tool that they send with the Havalon blades, but I also keep these are the little packages that these 60A blades come in, and they're not, you could rip them in half, but they do provide a measurable amount of protection. If I put that in there, and that's what it came in, kind of fold that over, and if that goes in the pocket of my pack, I don't risk sticking my hand in there and actually poke myself. So I do try and do that, keep those handy. The bigger blades for the bigger Havalon, they come with these little plastic jobs that you can unfold, and it provides even more protection. You can oftentimes, though, depending on how many blades you're buying at a time, you can get a plastic case like this. You can hold multiple blades in. I mean, the reality is I'm not going to be taking more than one spare blade for this and probably 2 spare blades for the smaller Havalon. In most cases, I can get through an entire deer with 1 blade, no problem. 2 is better because I can have 1 for kind of the dirtier stuff and 1 for the, you know, more finer, cleaner stuff. For this bigger blade, I have done an entire elk with 1 blade of this, and the companion blade I was kind of interchanging depending on what I was trying to cut. So didn't change blades between those 2. Did an entire bull elk with that. So they're going to have their pros and their cons in what you're going to want to have with you and what extra pieces you're going to feel like you're going to need to have in the woods. One last little, and this is something I just kind of figured out the other day with this outdoor edge. So the outdoor edge knives, they all come with this little code on the side. It says 350 there. So you'll see some of the other models will say 350 and a 500, which means it's designed to take the 350 blades and the 500 blades. Other ones will say 300, and it'll only take the 300 style blades. So the 300 or the 350s and the 500s are the same dimension in its mounting placement. If that makes sense. Now, this is a 500 blade. This is their fillet knife size. And so you'll notice it does not say 500, so this is not designed for this blade. They don't advertise this blade being a blade that's compatible with it, but what do you know? It fits just fine, locks in as it should. Okay, it's not going to be something I'm going to carry. It's not going to fit. But if I'm needing a longer blade in my processing to try and match more of the capabilities of the bigger Piranta, for example, then I can have this blade in my kit and I can pull it out, swap it in, use it for what I need to, pull it out, put it away, and when I can go back to the blade that does fit in the knife properly. Okay, and I will say that's the last thing I'm going to mention here is just kind of the utility of all of these 3 or 4 knives here in this case. Okay, I like a knife that's handy. Okay, I keep this at the ready either in my pocket or on my chest pack. I want something I can grab quickly and open up and deploy if I need, you know, to cut something really quick. We had a situation where a pack goat had gotten wrapped around a tree. Its lead got entangled, and it had slipped and fallen. And it was strangling itself, and another one of our kids was smart enough. He was able to grab his knife and whip that out quick as he could and slice that lead and save that goat. And sometimes you just need something ready like that. That being said, this knife requires the pressing of the button on the back of the knife. It's a two-handed operation, whereas these Havalons, single hand opening, and then it's got the little detent. I can get it past there, and I can close it all with one hand. And both Havalons are of that same style. I can do it that way, or I can do it one-handed safely if I need to. Okay, obviously the idea here is the same. If you wanted to have a fixed blade, you could have a fixed blade and do something like that. And a fixed blade and its sheath is going to be what it's going to be. But anyways, 3 of these replaceable blade knife options, all great options. All are going to have different strengths, different weaknesses, different weights at the end of the day, and considerations and what you're going to want to carry in your pack. Sometimes it might make sense to have, 2 knives, something with a little more rigidity and robustness, and something with a little bit, finer blade, more for more detail work. Whatever your needs are. Hopefully, this video gives you some more information that honestly I didn't have when I went out and was going to go buy a knife like this. I didn't know about a lot of these things that we're talking about. These are just not things that are discussed in their marketing brochures. These aren't things that tend to be discussed elsewhere online. So hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. Thank you.